Our speaker has given presentations at the Village in the past, but she's always reenacted as someone else. Today, she will take us skipping through the halls of 50s memories, as that was the time of her own childhood, from preschool through 8th grade. Lois's storytelling reaches around the world and back through time. For example, tonight she'll tell at a school's family literacy event, sharing tales of Michigan's native people. So she covers lots of different topics and times. In the past here, she's been a one-room school teacher, and she often portrays Liberetta, is it Lyric Green, who grew up on an Underground Railroad station in Shelby Township and later helped on the home front during the Civil War while her brothers were away fighting. Lois has already begun working on the stories of a Michigan woman in World War I as one of General Pershing's telephone operators, commonly called the Hello Girls. But today, it's her own history and probably some of your history too. Please help me welcome Lois Keel.
Thank you. And at the entrance, we tried to get people to pick up pieces of paper and pencils because with the exception of one person that I know of in here, and now I see a fellow coming in who's a volunteer, I believe, and also somebody who's videotaping over there. Other than that, everybody else who's here, no matter how well preserved we ladies are, and we don't usually make a point of telling how old we are, this was our era. So you're going to have some memories. So if you would jot them down, because unfortunately, I've got to keep going, and I've already had 5 minutes used up. So we're going to, as you may have heard, rock around the clock tonight. That's kind of the theme today. And I have to say there were some words during the 50s that as a child I didn't know about. I didn't know that we were baby boomers. But you know and I know the baby boomers were the children who were born after World War II and after the Depression, so people finally felt like, yay, it's safe to have a family. And they did. Although nowadays, I think maybe if you look back, most of us had 2.5 children. Always wondered about that half a child. Now, the Cold War. I did eventually start to hear about that, but I don't think I heard about it as a 50s child until maybe I was in grade school and getting in the upper grades. Korea, same thing. Although Korea began to eventually make more sense to me. The Red Scare certainly didn't make any sense to me. It wasn't anything that I knew anything about, and yet I understand here in the Detroit area you have a special connection to it. That it was all checking into anybody who might have communist affiliations and things like that came up with McCarthy. But the presidents, I'll tell you now, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. I didn't know there was a St. Louis, Michigan until I came here. Yeah. And so President Harry Truman, I didn't pay any attention to him until he was out of office and he was keeping the reporters charging along after him on the hills of Missouri in Independence, Missouri. Yeah, but I did know about all the buttons that said, I like Ike, I like Ike. And that probably rings a bell. Stevenson he had too much of a sense of humor to be president, everybody said. Years later, Kennedy had him be our ambassador to the UN, and I found out years later I had a connection to him. I have an aunt who worked for his brother, Dr. Ed Stevenson in Bloomington, Illinois. So you never know. They say we all are related somehow or another. But there was that McCarthy era, and then eventually JFK. This has been through a flood in our house. It says, if I were 21, I'd vote for Kennedy. And I changed my parents' voting habits. So there we are with that. You can also see, though, that some other things were happening. The space race we'll get into again in a little bit. And you can see down at a little further down, Sputnik. But the Korean War officially was a police action. Don't you feel like it was a police action? And it only supposedly ran from 50 to 53. Wouldn't you love to have, has anybody ridden on the QE2? The last of the luxury liners. Ah, we have somebody who did. It was huge, wasn't it? Titanic? No. And it started out as Indochina, but by the time I became aware of it, it was Vietnam. And 54 says Brown versus the B of E, or Board of Education. But I found recently something that went even a little before that. It started out in 1936 out in California, and it wasn't settled until 47 when Sylvia Mendez brought a similar lawsuit about being separate but equal, not being equal. And so that was the age when things were first starting to roll with civil rights. And by the time I got into high school, boy, were they rolling. Hungarian uprising, I knew something about because my parents included a dad who had, part of him was Yugoslavian, but part of him was also Hungarian. So yeah, I saw those people throwing things at the tanks. Years later, my daughters saw people getting crushed by tanks in China. I mean, history just rolls around. I do remember vaguely something about ships not being able to go down the Suez Canal in Egypt. I was horrified years later when they flooded the Valley of the Kings, but supposedly moved everything out. But that was Egypt there. Little Rock in '57, Khrushchev with his shoe and everything else like that, and even coming over here. I don't know when he came over to watch the making of Can-Can. And the Berlin crisis, I don't remember being aware that there was a blockade. Some of you who are older than I may be well aware of it. But Sputnik 1, 2, and 3 certainly took up 1957. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Look at those wages and the cost of a house. Oh my goodness. Time to move on. Well, I had a free-range childhood, they call it nowadays. Children, nobody thought anything of saying, go outside and play and don't come in until, well, it starts to get dark, my mother would say. And I meant it was dark. Yeah, you recognize that from your readers, I bet. Yes. Dick and Jane, and then I don't know who the little brother or sister was. Sally, yes, Sally, I think it was. And of course, Spot the dog, yes, and there were a few other critters in there. Now, we had next door, the milkman would deliver glass milk bottles. They never had a missing child on them, and nobody ever told me that I remember, don't speak to strangers, and you can tell I'm so shy I wouldn't. Okay, keeping on going, it's time to get sweet. Do you remember Fizzies? And the straws and everything? And there's the candy buttons. Oh, I loved Nickel Nip. You could bite off the top, it was wax, and drink it on down. But that wasn't the only wax. There were wax lips. There were wax mustaches. Oh, yeah. And something that would definitely horrify parents today, candy cigarettes. Oh, couldn't possibly have that. Now, in the neighborhood, well, there goes my hula hoop. We had 4 wheels. I remember my daughter asking, where do I get one of those? Because she knew she could stand up better with 4 wheels. We had 4 wheels on our skates. She tightened them up with a skate key that hurt like crazy. But you could tighten them up on your tennies or your Keds or whatever they were. You know, all of those good things. You might play hopscotch. Nowadays, I can't even use chalk without getting voiceless. So if you want to shut me up, give me some chalk. We would run through the sprinkler. We wouldn't step on a crack. Why? Yeah. You could play jacks, you could play pickup sticks, you could play Old Maid. My hula hoop, I can still do it, but I'm not sure if I dare with all the sound that they've got me on. We'll talk about hula hoops a bit more. But you know, nowadays they've come back. Didn't keep it up long enough there. But nowadays they're an exercise tool, which I haven't been exercising with. And something else that I noticed today that just occurred to me, leggings are making a comeback. But at a time like this, now we were always warmer in St. Louis, at least it felt like it was. We would wear leggings under our uniform skirts, or we would wear snow pants. Ladies, we didn't wear slacks, we didn't wear jeans, unless maybe we were at home and playing. Somebody said, somebody told me, go from pants to shorts. You know, never get out of it. That hula hoop's problem. Well, at any rate, those were the sort of things. Oh, something else that apparently started in St. Louis, and I don't know if you did it here or not. We caught lightning bugs in a jar for medical research. We caught so many, I notice nowadays they're starting to come back. I don't know if it's just that Michigan doesn't get as many normally because of the weather. Pollution. Ah, here, I thought we children spoiled it. Well, then at least we're safe. The pollution came along from everybody, right? Well, there are fewer of those now. Something else. We always played with paper dolls. I made shows for paper dolls. I made costumes. I did all of that good stuff. I loved it. We also made necklaces and crowns out of clover. Do you do that now still a little? Teach the skill. Teach it. How to braid necklaces and crowns, not clowns. Now, both in the neighborhood and on the playground, we would jump rope. You might do it single or double Dutch. Don't forget red hot peppers. And so we would jump to not last night, but the night before. Didn't do it? 24 robbers came knocking at my door. Oh my heavens, you Michiganders. Did you do the lady with the alligator purse? There you go. Okay. And then there was Cinderella dressed in yellow, went upstairs to meet her fella. How many kisses did she get? And you keep on going until you run out. Right. Or until it goes red hot peppers. And double Dutch, you had to jump on in. I never did get double Dutch very well. Now, not only in jump rope, we might call out this one. Let's see, I'll pick on you, Tom. Lois and Tommy sitting in a tree, Kissing. First came love, then came marriage, then came Lois with a baby carriage. Well, you knew it. Okay, and you sang, found a peanut, or you might to the tune of Old Smoky, or you might have on top of spaghetti, all covered with cheese. And then don't forget, this one was a favorite. Mine eyes have seen the burning of the coming of the burning of the school. We have captured all the teachers and have broken every rule. Some of you didn't sing that? Oh, you're too good. Too good. Now, of course, out on the playground, besides the swing, does anybody call it a teeter-totter anymore? No. And the teachers told my mother, she goes up on the jungle gym and you can see her panties. Oh yeah, and we would play other games too. We would play things like Red Rover, you know, and you'd have to run. Or we might have, let's see, Simon Says, or Red Light, Green Light, and Mother May I. So all of those things make a part of things we did on the playground. Now, in school, I always bought my lunch. My mom didn't believe in making it, thank heavens. But some of the kids brought their lunches in lunch boxes that now are quite the antique to buy. And they always came with a thermos bottle, even though they sold very cheaply milk. And in addition to that, in class, now they're just playing at school, but in class you made paper chains for Christmas for your trees, or maybe, I don't know what happened to the little angel that used to go at the top of our tree that I remember vividly what she looked like, that I made. And then for February, you'd have the silhouettes of Washington and Lincoln, right? And and also in February, also a highlight, you would make hearts with doilies. And even though you would bring in those little, nowadays they still have them, only they have maybe SpongeBob on them, but you would bring in those little cardboard cards that you'd put in the class mailbox, and you'd get those little tiny hearts that had things like "Be Mine" and "Won't You Be My Valentine." I don't know what they say nowadays. I haven't brought myself to look. Now, as a librarian, which was what I did in combination with storytelling for a long time, I had to remember what stories did I hear. We had tons of golden books, which is what Pokey Little Puppy is. Over there, that Cinderella isn't the cover on the Cinderella that I had, but it was a Disney one. And if you look in the corner, the cat is looking at Gus Gus. And do you remember how they sang, "Cinderella, Cinderella"? I bet they don't do that in the new Disney Cinderella. But that was what I remember. In the center, nowadays they have an anniversary issue, but I know my mother loved to go around and name all the flowers and the trees and everything to me. And so When the Root Children Wake Up was a book I recall. And over in the corner, Norman the Doorman, and over there, Pet of the Met by Don Freeman. When I saw those 3 books at the library, I recognized them. I couldn't tell you what other books I had unless I looked through. And basically what we bought were things of the caliber of the golden books, and you bought them maybe at the grocery store or whatever, I guess. But that was what were the books that I remember. I also remember. Now, do you remember that you didn't have your own private phone? The lines changed from party lines to private. And your telephone numbers weren't just numbers. Now, mine were in St. Louis, so it was Mission or Mohawk or something like that. What's another exchange that was here locally, Tom? Federal, Woodward, Lincoln, all these different things. Wasn't it easier to remember? Oh yeah, I loved it. And not only that, but if you got a long distance call, it meant either it was your birthday or somebody died. And if you had to make a long distance call, didn't you for the longest time, even after that was all done away with and you knew the price was the same no matter when, you only did late at night or you did it on weekends? And maybe you even had a mother who had an egg timer because 3 minutes were 75 cents and the bing went off and you got off. Things like that for the phone. Well, I started out the first 5 years of my life, which means the final 5. Can you believe, you mentioned 65 was when the museum got started? It's been 65 years since 1950. And I was grandfathered in. My dad had a store in the Tivoli Theater building. And so we had an apartment. You can kind of see them up over the marquee there. We had an apartment in the Tivoli Theater building. And so I was grandfathered in when they gave birth to me. And then we got out just in time right before kindergarten. But I was always the mascot, so I could always go in anytime, even after we moved out, and have stale next day popcorn. I'm addicted to it. I am. Now, movies. Oh, look at all those people that you only see on TNT or A&E. Now, Elizabeth Taylor and Judy Garland were grown up by the time I was aware of them, because I didn't have the chance to see The Wizard of... Oh, I take it back, I did. My mother was mortified. I don't know how I saw it, but I said, "Oh, Mom, Aunt Em looks just like the Witch and Wizard of Oz." I didn't have baby talk. Is it a wonder I'm a storyteller? But one time, years later, when I was at the library, I called up a woman and I heard the Wizard of Oz in the background. And I said, "Oh, I didn't know it was playing." And she says, now this was by the time video came in, "It is at our house every day." But look down at the bottom. Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. There were a whole series of those monster things, and they would have kid matinees. I must have gone to one of them because from that point on, I was afraid of the dark and I had to have a nightlight. Yeah. So that's the sort of thing that I remember about the movies until later. Oh, by the way, one other thing. My parents went to the picture show. I don't know when it became the movies, but that's where they went.
Did they get dishes when you went?
You know, I don't know if they got dishes or not, because it wasn't something I was aware of. But they may have, because I know it started, I think, during the Depression even, that they started that.
Started, but I remember.
Yeah. Now, TV. I didn't get a TV. I could say safely, oh, that's before my time, because we didn't get a TV until I was in 7th or 8th grade. But I did go to friends' houses. Over there is Howdy Doody being held by Buffalo Bob. Next to him is Clarabelle the Clown. And then over there is Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. Wasn't Ollie supposedly a dragon? Yeah. I always thought he looked like a giraffe. But I love Jerry Mahoney. Who you calling a dummy? I had a Jerry Mahoney that was put out by Texaco. Is it any wonder that I started doing puppets and things like that later on? Mickey Mouse Club. I taught my children when my last name was still Springnether, Sprengether, because I heard through one of the Detroit newspapers that that's how the Finns up in the UP taught their long last names. And it worked. Now, my favorite, of course, was Annette, wasn't everybody's, and a little guy named Cubby. But you probably had some of your own in there. Now, I have to say, Walt Disney had the show on only for 3 years, and do you know why? It was because ABC wanted to put more commercials in, and he refused. Now, he was also adamant that the Mouseketeers had to be regular kids, not actors. So he went looking around in regular schools to find kids with just that spark. And then they went to school, because it was the law, 5 days a week in addition to any taping that they did, or filming. And then they had to work on the 6th day, and even on Sundays they often were performing. So it wasn't easy being one of those Mouseketeers. And looking on down at Howdy Doody over there, I'm going to take a little trip on this. Do you know the name of where he lived? This is kind of like Doodyville, yeah, kind of like Mr. Rogers with his neighborhood. It was a circus town with both people and puppets. And who was Double Duty? His twin brother. I didn't remember Double Duty. Howdy Doody had a sister, Heidi Doody. I remember, though, Phineas T. Bluster. You remember him? Yeah. And I had forgotten all about Flubadub. He was an animal made up of different parts of animals. And then I remembered Princess Summer, Fall, Winter, Spring. She was so beautiful. So the kids who watched the show, they were called the Peanut Gallery. Yeah, Peanut Gallery. They were, and there was always a huge waiting line, they say, for tickets. I don't know, I never got a chance to. But at any rate, if you go on down to Ed Sullivan, Tom, you've been sitting there relaxing for too long. Ed Sullivan brought on a shocking performer. Elvis with those hips. But he started out performing gently. Go ahead. It's not doing it, oh, love me tender, love me true. You can skip that one then. But he didn't just do that, because there was another one. I'm going to go ahead and sing it, and we can skip Elvis and just stay with that disc. There was another one that he had called, You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog, just a-crying all the time. You ain't never caught a rabbit, and you ain't no friend of mine. Yes.
Get out of the building.
Yeah. And there was another one, and I have now boots that are blue suede. Remember about, don't you step on my blue suede shoes. Now, moving on over on Elvis. So just stay with that one disc that you were on originally. No, don't bother with Elvis. But if you go over to Ed Sullivan standing there, do you see the mouse? Topo Gigio. And then next to him was Senor Oensis, and he would make his puppet with a doll body and an upside down face, and it's all right, it's all right. You know, is it any wonder I became a puppeteer in addition to storytelling? We've got Howdy Doody and well, maybe not Ollie, but at any rate, Jerry Mahoney and all the gang. So all of that was part of the TV that I was aware of, even though we didn't have one. But here's some other TV shows. I bet here in Michigan, the Lone Ranger was really big. And everybody talks about I Love Lucy, but I hardly saw her. Maybe in reruns. But I knew the name. What was the nickname for Rin Tin Tin? Rinty. Now, I knew Lassie later on, with June Lockhart as the mother and you know, things like that. But it kept on going all the way to 73. Oh, Gunsmoke. My mother loved it. Mr. Dillon, and Miss Kitty, and Doc. Oh, yeah. That went on a long time. And do you know who Matt Dillon's brother was? The guy who became the one on Boom, 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 Mission Impossible. Peter Graves and his brother, yeah. And the Phil Silvers Show, I never appreciated Sergeant Bilko until years later when Funny Thing Came to the Forum came along, and he played the same darn character, but by then it fit him. And Perry Mason always solved the crimes on the witness stand. You can't do that. The laws of discovery and all these other things that just didn't happen. Years later, he got in a wheelchair and played a detective that way. 77, Sunset Strip with Kooky, Kooky, lend me your comb, yeah. Oh, and head him up, move him out, rawhide. And we didn't even know how big Clint Eastwood was going to become as Rowdy Yates later on, yeah. And Bonanza, there was Pop, there was Little Joe, there was Hoss. Who was the other brother? Adam, I thought that was it. My dad's name was Adam. He used to say, Adam, I'm Adam, Madam, I'm Adam. I should have known that, but I remember Hop Sing. Now, I fell in love with, and it was only at the end of the 50s, I fell in love with The Twilight Zone, but fortunately it came back again. Okay, moving on to toys. TV was made for it. Up until then, nobody knew the advertising potential TV had, especially among kids. But as it grew in popularity, and every house had it, not just a few, along came Mr. Potato Head, for example. Did you know it was invented in 1949 with a real potato? Well, somewhere along the line, Hasbro bought it, and it became plastic. Of course, nowadays we still use Frisbees, and now they even have the soft ones, which my dog thinks are for tug. And if you couldn't have a pet, you might have an ant farm, yeah. And do you recognize over there in the corner, this is how she started out looking. That's Barbie. Now, there's been so much fuss with the anniversary for Barbie. She started out in Germany. This is what she looked like. And by the time she really caught on around here, I had an aunt who was making doll clothes and making a very nice living for Barbie. The only problem was my cousin Susie, she talked all the kids into cutting her hair. Ooh, those dolls would have been worth so much, but not now. And of course there was the hula hoop. And well, you had a chance to see it before. And I asked people if they remembered a little more about it. Now, it started out in Australia. Did you know that? And it was made out of bamboo. But the Whammo company was the company that brought it here. And the advertisement I remembered went, shoop, shoop, hula hoop. So now you know, and you can shoop to your heart's content if you're willing to exercise away with it. So everybody was getting in on the, whoops, I want to be sure you can get this here. Everybody was getting all of the different toy market, but that wasn't all. Music. And I won't go into some of the more mainstream ones, although as a kid around, I think about 8th grade, I got my first record player. And do you remember 45s had those little discs you could put in there? But I had an LP, and there were two performers that my parents thought were appropriate for me. One was Ricky, later on Rick Nelson, and Pat Boone. So there were those. Now the guys in the middle, if you don't recognize them, that was from a TV show called The Hit Parade. But play a piece for us. My husband is not of the tech age, or at least our CD player, to be perfectly honest, has been a little bit difficult. Should I just go ahead? Splish, splash, I was taking a bath. Yeah, long about a Saturday night. Rub-dub, just a-dancing in the tub, thinking everything was all right. Yes, well, that was Bobby Darin. I loved Bobby Darin. I did. Now, the Everly Brothers there, they were such a hit that their song, which is the next one there, oh yeah, Bye Bye Love. This is the one played almost a year. Every week, the hit paraders in the center there had to come up with a new way of presenting it. I think it was 40-some weeks they had to do that. Of course, back then the movie could have been a drive-in. Okay, fade him on out. Now the next one there is Fats Domino, and I love this piece.
So do I.
I love this piece. And you don't ever see anybody dancing this. Can you get it? Okay. The Stroll. All it really is just a chain dance. Don't you wish people danced the Stroll still? That was on Blueberry Hill. Okay. Now, over right just off of Fats Domino, we've got the Platters, I think. I couldn't do it all. This is where you remember on TV they had technical difficulties. Do you remember that? Okay. And then moving on over, by the way, talking about TV and technical difficulties, nobody ever puts on at midnight the flag and the Star-Spangled Banner and then a test pattern. Yeah. Okay, ready? And this is Little Anthony and the Imperials, I think. See, we didn't have all wild songs, but he had a voice that was different. Yeah, Little Anthony. My voice is lower than that. Here's my pillow in my heart, caused by you. Okay, now the last one, and some people say this was the guy for whom that song about the day the music died is, yeah, American Pie, but that wasn't in the 50s, was Buddy Holly. And this is Buddy, I think. I didn't make it easy on Tom. I gave cues all over the place. Cause that'll be the day when I die. Okay. And this may be why you die. Look what came up in the 50s. Fast food. Now, Dairy Queen did have ice cream before it, but McDonald's had the very first bit of speedy service system. Say that 5 times fast. And J.R. Simplot invented the first way that you could have French fries at home with frozen French fries. Before that, all the fast food places had to chop and peel and everything else. It was like being in the army. KFC with those secret herbs and spices got started. Then Burger King had their first restaurant. Ray Kroc in '55 turned it into a major chain. It got started buying 9 of those McDonald Brothers restaurants. And Pizza Hut. Years later, how could we keep our kids reading without the Pizza Hut reading thing? So I'm in favor of that one. Now, this is a timetable of all kinds of innovations. And I remember, now, the credit card just got started, but it wasn't one you could carry over until years later. At first, you had American Express and Diners Club. And so you had to pay it off every month. It wasn't until Bank AmeriCard, which became, does anybody know? Visa, that you could carry a small portion over and they'd charge you a little bit for the interest. But I remember, you mentioned about dishes and things. The grocery store would sell dishes, And they would also, and so would even some of the other stores, would give you green stamps were all she gave, and green stamps were all I took. Green stamps were all she gave. So I pasted them all in my green stamp book, and I kept on collecting them, and by the time I got enough, they phased it out. Now the H-bomb, there are people like Maureen O'Hara who say all that testing that we saw on our newsreels did a lot of things to people here in this country too. The transistor radio, I remember making a radio. Remember? Some of you who maybe played around with that. Oh, and Robot. Robbie the Robot. Remember him? Yeah. And solar cells, nobody knew what to do with. Nowadays, look at it. Polio vaccine. Tom actually had polio briefly, a very mild case. I remember us all getting lined up and taken off to the county health department, and we all got shots. So there was the polio vaccine. Hovercraft, I have a friend from Hungary, she's a storyteller, who's now down in Bowling Green. She came over into Michigan and she said, oh, the big three must be planning on making hovercraft. She was talking about the roads. Video recorders and videotape got started together. Nuclear power, you'll notice it was over in England, and remember there were demonstrators against it? And then came satellites. They actually, I remember they burst in on movies even to tell about how Russia had the first satellites blasted into space. I remember the name of the dog, do you? Laika, little white dog. Now in the meantime, we were busy losing monkeys. We couldn't get them to make it. The computer modem came up in '58 and microchip in '58. But do you remember UNIVAC and how it took a whole room of probably about as big as this? Oh, and then the lunar probes. Some people still deny this. In '59, they passed the moon. In '59, they crashed on the moon. In '59, the Russians photographed the far side of the moon that nobody had ever seen. Finally, we got a monkey to survive. And then the world had a radio telescope so we could find out, is there anybody out there? And we're still wondering. I hear X-Files is about to start up again, wondering about that. So I know that Michigan thinks about Motown. Now, in my grade school area, we played a game called Rhythm. And the way we all got started together was to go, my daddy wears long underwear, boom. Rhythm, time to name, cars. And so you would go into Chrysler. But is DeSoto around anymore? I'm not sure about Dodge and Plymouth. Dodge is, Plymouth isn't. Ford, I've got it accidentally looking like part of it's X'd out there, but Ford itself is around, so is Lincoln. Not sure about Mercury. Edsel. People say Edsel didn't make it because of that great big post down the center. The darn thing sometimes threw into reverse. People got killed that way. I believe, didn't Jane Mansfield get beheaded that way, I think, if I remember correctly. Now, General Motors still does the Buick, but I think the reason they got rid of Oldsmobile was because it was old. But I'm sure sorry that they got rid of the line about the Pontiac. Tom, who worked at GM, said the idea was you'd start out with a Chevy, the classier one was to move into Pontiac, and you just kept on moving on up until eventually you bought yourself a Cadillac. We'll get to the Cadillac. There were also all these independents that are gone. Now, you may have seen about Hudson. Yeah.
There was one you left out there.
Oh, I'm sure.
Kaiser Fraser.
Oh, okay. Well, I know there's things I've left off. I've had to just kind of get the big ones. But you've probably seen all about how the big three did some maneuvering for things like getting rid of the independents. Now, this was the little Nash Rambler, because in '54, CEO George Mason died. Now they had in '54, Nash acquired Hudson, created AMC, American Motors Corporation. And George Mason, their CEO, died. And do you know who the successor was? Yes, George Romney, not to be confused with Mitt Romney. And they had this little Nash Rambler created a song. Beep, 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 beep. His horn went beep, beep, beep. While riding in my Cadillac. What to my surprise, a little Nash Rambler was right beside, about 1/3 my size. The guy must have wanted to pass me up, 'cause he kept on tooting his horn. I'll show him that a Cadillac is not a car to scorn. Beep, 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 and you keep on going, and it keeps getting faster and faster and faster until by the end, he's going, well, it finally gets to we're going 120, and as fast as I can go, and the Rambler pulled alongside of me as if I was going slow. The fellow rolled down his window and yelled for me to hear, and do you know what he yelled? Yes, get me out of, hey buddy, how can I get this car out of second gear? There you go. So that's the Rambler. And you know, air conditioning obviously was an option back then, but did you know that heating was an option too? Heaters and radios? Yeah, so much for cars, except there are some words that maybe you've never heard or maybe you don't remember. Fender skirts? Did they have to be properly dressed? Something else that I didn't remember, there were Lincoln Continental Kits. What's his face on TV say about that? Where you would put on a fake tire on the back and it would extend your rear. So there were Continental Kits. Oh, I wish they had these still. Thank heavens most people don't have to park parallel anymore, but I still don't do the greatest. That's something I miss. Something else you may miss. Do you remember a knob on the steering wheel? Suicide knob, he said. Some people also called them Necker's knobs. I'll let you decide why they called them that. Well, at any rate, the parking brake also at some point became the proper term. But when we were growing up, it was called an emergency brake. Where's the suspense of not having an emergency brake anymore? Mine always seemed to get stuck, but whatever. And my grandmother always called a car the machine. Does that show you where her mind was? Now, today, some tall vehicles like trucks and vans have brought back running boards. This was another use for them, but my next door neighbors, they used to love when their dad came home to hop on the running boards of his car. And so I remember running boards that much. Now, at the start of the 50s, in case you're wondering, the average new car, they say, cost $1,750. And you know what gas was? It went for 27 cents a gallon. 27 cents. Now, there was an exception. The Aero car was supposedly the car with the built-in freeway. That was that hover car, I think. Anyway, it seemed like a good idea, never caught on, and that was going to be $10,000. So this was the first time back then when teenagers actually had a chance, your brother did this, yeah, actually had a chance to own their own cars and drive their own cars, and he did it before a license, right? Later on, he wound up working for GM, as did your family. By the end of the 50s, the decade had an average car costing, oh my gosh, $2,200. And fuel cost 30 cents a gallon. So, and it took a long time to even get into upper 30s, because I was not driving until I came to Michigan, and that was, gee, a long time ago. But at any rate, the 50s had some of our most memorable, most collectible, just go to the Woodward Dream Cruise, cars. Some of the other safety features that caught on in the 50s were seat belts, vacuum-operated windshield wipers. Thank heavens they eventually changed that. Automatic gearboxes. I was terrible with a manual stick shift, ruined a car. Disc brakes. Nowadays, we don't have disc brakes. But synchronized manual gearboxes, electric windows, and I would throw in another thing that was in there, electric locks. I got into my uncle's car, and he had, I think it was a Cadillac, and it had electric locks. And I said to myself, as I was heading into high school, if I ever go out, I'm going to make sure they don't have electric locks on the door. It was a thought. But there were radial tires started up then and power steering. So all the things we take for granted now. Now, some of the advertising for cars that you might recognize. Willis Woody car for comfort and economy. Willis became Jeep, but we nowadays don't think of Willis. Studebaker is a sleek and fleet look with road-hugging sure-footedness. Buick, the beautiful buy. Just for you. Ford cars, worth more when you buy it, worth more when you sell it. My parents alternated between Fords and Chevys. Dodge 54, from any point of view, a lot more for your money. Shows you where they were focused. Whereas Chrysler was between thought and action with instant power response. Pontiac 1955 with 180 horsepower V8. I told you it was for the teens. With V8 and twin streak styling. This was the time when you also had two-tone cars start up. That was when it started. I remember we got a 56 Chevy and it was turquoise and white. I still love turquoise. American Motors Rambler from Nash and Hudson, distinction in driving. And Cadillac elegance is the word that expresses it. Now, I had all of those there. Okay. This was supposedly elegance. Wall-to-wall carpeting. Nowadays, you get charged extra if you have wooden floors in some places because it's considered more of an elegance. But back then, everybody wanted to have wall-to-wall carpeting. No, off-white was for the room you don't go in. Although I one time did a storytelling on a Halloween where they had rain outside and hay bales and mud, and they tracked on through that carpeting. Oh, they had to replace it, I'm sure. We also had things like, do you remember Mary Jane's and saddle shoes? I didn't wear saddle shoes until I went to high school because I didn't know how to tie my shoes. But penny loafers, I had to hunt for these. That was what we had. Oh, and remember circle pins and white gloves and bobby pins. We still can buy bobby pins, but one time I was someplace where I heard a guy go, bobby pins, and he sounded like you were out of the cave. I still use them, whatever. But everything nowadays, here's a phrase that was the height of elegance, or at least that you were rich enough to afford it. Store-bought. You had a store-bought dress. Nowadays, everything's store-bought. And brassiere was a word you no longer hear. Now it's just bra. Unmentionables. Would kids even know what it... Do you know what unmentionables are? Okay. She's not that much of a kid. And somewhere along the line, there were other things like, I miss coast to coast. Nowadays, it's worldwide, and even that doesn't have much meaning. But everything seems to have changed just a bit. When we were kids, they talked about the stork visits, or that somebody was in a family way, or maybe a little bit bolder, they were expecting. So, oh, and here's another one, talking about our tea over here. You don't have coffee today, just tea. But if you had, don't you miss percolators? It just sounds perky right away. I blame Mr. Coffee for that. So, yeah. I miss all those marketing words that were made up. Everybody made up things so that they sold better. There were things like Dynaflow and Electrolux. And the Admiral TV was advertised with SpectraVision. I don't know. But was there ever a telethon for wiping out lumbago? Does anybody have lumbago anymore? My dad talked about Qatar. I had to look up what the heck was he talking about. Do you know what catarrh is? Nowadays, we'd probably call it allergies. It was the inflammation of your mucous membranes. You know, kids got castor oil. I didn't. And yet I didn't. Mothers always threatened their kids with it. Thank heavens I was lucky enough that I didn't have to have it. Now, some words aren't gone, but they're definitely on the endangered list. Nobody ever seems, well, they do sometimes say supper. I miss people saying supper as opposed to dinner. Dinner could be at any time of the day. It was supposed to be your biggest meal. So for some people, it was the middle of the day, right? Don't get the two confused. And that's what I was told, was it was always your largest meal of the day. Now, can you believe this is the way it was in 1950? Look at those prices. Look at how many drive-ins there were. Peanuts got started, the Peanuts cartoons. Dennis the Menace. Oh, elevators. Up until the 50s, you always got into an elevator with an operator. Talk about an endangered profession. It's almost like when we went out east and we found that there was a little town in Connecticut, where it was the buggy whip capital? Yeah. You know, some things just go out of stage. Oh, Smokey the Bear said only you can predict forest fires. This past weekend, I was at the dog park out in Orion Oaks, and they had a trail closed off for a controlled burn. Nowadays, we do it differently. But it's not true only you can prevent forest fires. Lightning can spark it too. So there's that. Minute rice, oh, thank heavens. Anything that made food quickly, I'm in favor of. And Faulkner got the Nobel Prize. Jukeboxes. That's where I mention about, no, I don't mention about the little discs for the 45s. But they went everywhere. And then eventually you started having, instead of those great big monster things, you started having ones at your table. And you can see where the Port Authority in New York City was just getting started. And grilled cheese, now they say Kraft is going to merge with Heinz. How time marches on there. Ball of fire gumballs. Oh, and there were jawbreakers too, remember? Yeah. And Pillsbury and General Mills found you had to add an egg. They could have put it in the mix, but people didn't think it was their own, and it felt too artificial. So you put in eggs. Silly putty. Oh, there's the 45 RPM record attachment. Sugar Pops, they finally started appealing to kids with breakfast cereal. Cinderella, that's how many births there were. I've got on there today, it's 6,902 billion, but this was done 5 years ago. So those figures I need to probably go ahead and update. But look at how the life expectancy today has actually gone down. And I haven't updated it then. Oh, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. That was how you solved anything. Catch a tiger by a toe. Mistakes were a do-over. The race issue meant who could race the fastest. It wasn't until the 60s that people actually started talking about it. Talked about fireflies. I was shocked at how my kids had a hard time with best friends. Best friends can change in a minute nowadays. And yet we maybe have, I know I have, hundreds on my Facebook page, and whatever. The worst thing you could get from the opposite sex was cooties. He touched me. Having a weapon in school was a slingshot. A foot of snow, at least in St. Louis, was a dream come true. I don't think it is around here. Definitely not. And the Saturday morning cartoons were not 30-minute cartoons for some action figure. Ollie Ollie Oxenfree, I can't for the life of me figure out what the heck we were talking about, but Ollie Ollie Oxenfree, everybody had to come on in and everything. We spun around, we got dizzy, and we fell down, and that was how we got our giggles. Worst embarrassment, being the last one picked for a team, and I was a terrible catcher, but great for dodgeball. And War was a card game. Baseball cards went in your spokes to make that engine sound. Nowadays, the adults take the orange-flavored aspirin. Water balloons were the ultimate weapon. Nowadays, you can get super soakers. And so if you remember all this, you lived. And this has been our break from grown-up life, and you can talk about it to others. I'm on target. I'll leave this up here for other things you can remember or whatever. You wanted me to end about this time, right? So we're all set. I'm on target exactly. Thank you all. You're a great bunch.